We'll try to have the dialogue and discussion, and I would appeal to other people on this platform, including those who are using Facebook, who are following us on Facebook. If they want to post questions, we can always take their questions and ask Barrister Joyce Nyamboli. Barrister Joyce, I'm going to start off by asking you to please define to our people, because a lot has been going on during this our war going into the 7th year. And recently we have gotten reports and claims of certain actions that teeter on war crimes, which we know at the end of this, nobody would be able to save those who are guilty of war crimes. Once the international community, the International Criminal Court, and by God's grace, an independent fact-finding mission arrives to assess what happened during the war. We know that a lot of our people have been emotional in the way they react, and they think that going tit for tat with La République in its human rights abuses advances or justifies the lines we shouldn't cross. So I would like you, from a legal perspective, to first explain to our people what the legal definition of a war crime is.
Thank you very much. And I think that this conversation is very timely. And I believe this is not the first of its kind on this platform. But it's also important that as the war progresses or as the conflict deteriorates, we continue to remind people of the consequences of their actions. So war crimes are very serious, and I would like to also not just limit myself to what war crimes are, but also talk a little bit about crimes against humanity. So war crimes are serious violations of laws and customs of war committed during an armed conflict. So that means that even war has laws and customs. War operates in a framework. So not everything in war is permissible. And so when you violate the customs of the laws, when you violate laws and customs of war, then we have war crimes. War crimes include deliberate attacks on civilians, on civilian objects, on mistreatment or killing of prisoners of war, and other actions that violate the rules of international humanitarian law, which is the body of laws that govern war. And the same body of law also goes ahead to define crimes against humanity, which are serious violations committed as a part of widespread or systemic attacks against a civilian population. These include acts of murder, torture, enslavement, rape, and other forms of inhumane treatment. Crimes against humanity are committed in times of war and in times of peace. But if you see the difference here, war crimes violate the principles of the laws and customs of war. Crimes against humanity violate our humanness and our dignity as human beings. The difference is usually in the term of context. War crimes would always happen in a war setting. Crimes against humanity can happen in war or in times of peace. But one of the things that cut across both of them is when you target civilians, which is where I'd like us to focus on. I'd also like to point out that war crimes are not only committed by government forces, they're also committed by non-state actors. Like in our case, the separatist fighters, our armed fighters. And if you just for a second Google online about the war in Cameroon, you wouldn't find the information on the internet only about the crimes which the government forces are committing, but you always find in almost same amounts and even as violent as the government crimes are, crimes committed by our own fighters against our own people. So yes, I think this is very timely. And we need to continue to remind them that you're not any different, you're not exempt from the law, you're not an exception, and that these laws apply in war as well as in peace. So there's no escaping it, okay? And there are not just the Geneva Conventions, which is what we always refer to when we talk about war crimes and crimes against humanity. We have other international treaties and international laws that also cover this. But let me just go ahead to focus on the Geneva Conventions because they are more defined, they're more elaborate, and they're what we usually refer to as the conventions. All 5 of them are usually what we would go to under international law for the essence of what war crimes and everything is. Just to list a few of the crimes which are considered war crimes under the Geneva Convention. It will be intentionally killing civilians or other protected persons, torturing or inhumanely prisoners of war, taking hostages or using them as shields, attacking civilian objects or areas that are not military targets. Those include schools, hospitals, churches, using prohibited methods and weapons of warfare, attacking medical personnel, facilities, or transports, unlawful confinement and deprivation of the right to fair trial, destroying or seizing property without military necessity. The reason why I'm bringing out these ones are because these are usually the areas where you find our Southern Cameroonian and Amazonian fighters. Those are the things that you find them doing a lot, which are clearly defined in these conventions as war crimes. I don't know if they're doing it because they're trying to, even just the act of trying to terrorize the population is a crime against humanity. You're making people live in constant fear and terror, especially when you're targeting civilians. War is supposed to be between 2 armed groups, 2 armed conflict, 2 armed groups in the conflict. Civilians are the ones who bear the brunt of the war more than any other person. Yes, so those are the few examples that I can give for war crimes that are contextual in our case. And if I go beyond what other international laws would describe as war crimes, they include rape, sexual violence, and other forms of sexual abuse, enforced disappearance and torture, extrajudicial killings, attacking religious or cultural properties, including places of worship, museums, and archives, deliberately causing starvation or denying access to essential supplies of food, water, or medical care, using child soldiers, intentionally targeting children for violence or exploitation, forced conscription or other forms of forced labor, attacking or damaging infrastructure, inhumane treatment of Guineas, including inhumane treatment would include all these videos that they do with people in very I don't know, they put people in videos where they're killing them, maiming them, just depriving them of basic dignity. Their private parts are exposed, they're in dirt. All of these things constitute inhumane treatment, and these are war crimes.
Thank you very much, Barrister. I'm happy you made the distinction between war crimes and crimes against humanity, which does not, these abuses don't necessarily happen during war, or they could happen during war, but those are separate offenses as far as international law is concerned. In over 150 or so jurisdictions or signatories to those treaties you mentioned. What about, you spoke about the Geneva Convention, and we've also heard about the Rome Statutes. Could you throw some light on what the differences are and what the Rome Statutes are?
So the Rome Statute created the International Criminal Court, which has jurisdiction over war crimes committed by both state and non-state actors. You see, it's a little challenging for the Geneva. Let me rephrase. The Rome Statute created the International Criminal Court, right, which has jurisdiction to prosecute these wars, these crimes are committed during wartime and crimes against humanity, right? And then the Geneva Convention is just a body of laws, it's a treaty, which many, if not all, states have signed. I have to verify how many states have signed the Geneva Convention as at today. But most states are party to the Geneva Convention, but some states are not party to the International Criminal Court. Another, for example, Cameroon, government is not part of the International Criminal Court. They didn't sign the treaty creating the court, so the court does not have jurisdiction over Cameroon per se. That does not mean that Cameroonian armed forces or the state actors in Cameroon, the non-state actors, who are committing war crimes will not get prosecuted by other avenues.
Yes, I'm happy you mentioned that, because there is a false sense of security that because Cameroon didn't sign the Rome Statute, anything happening in that territory will not be prosecuted. But I remember that the case of al-Bashir of Sudan, the case was referred to the ICC by a UN resolution, I think. And so, although Sudan didn't sign, also it's not a signatory to the Rome Statute, there was an international warrant put out for al-Bashir, and I think part of the readmitting Sudan into the international community was them handing him over to the International Criminal Court. I wanted you to speak a little bit the extent to which countries or international organizations like the UN could still refer our case to the ICC for prosecution.
Okay, so forgive me, I still have a terrible cold. So what I was trying to add to that is, even if the ICC does not have jurisdiction, there are many ways that they can bring you under their jurisdiction. There are many ways that other countries and other states that are interested can exercise their universal jurisdiction. There are certain principles in law. Some people think that jurisdiction is the place where the crime was committed, or I must have been a signatory to the treaty to be covered. But when it comes to war crimes and crimes against humanity, anybody has jurisdiction. We've had cases where I'm trying to find the name of the person, where the courts in Germany, the US has convicted a former Liberian warlord, Mohammed Jabata. He came to the US and filed for asylum, lied on his application, but the US later found that he was implicated in human rights abuses during the Liberia Civil War in the 90s. He was convicted for that in 2019. In Guatemala, the court, a local court, convicted members of a paramilitary group for crimes committed in the 80s and the 90s in 2017. That shows you that these crimes don't have a statute of limitation. It means that even if you think you're free today, in 10 years, if a new president comes up or Ambazonia eventually becomes free, we would revisit all of these things. It doesn't run out. You cannot say that it's 30 years since I did this, or it's 50 years since I did this. No, you can be tried at any time, any day, anywhere. People have been tried in Germany and in which one is Dutchland again? Netherlands? They have been tried in Netherlands for crimes in Rwanda during the genocide, and they were tried in 2012, 2016, during the outbreak of the Syrian war. Some of the Syrian members of government fled into Germany, and they were tried there for crimes they committed in Syria. They didn't commit them on German soil. So many countries can exercise their right to universal jurisdiction. I remember one time, a judge in South Africa, I think al-Bashir was going to visit South Africa one time under, was it Oliver Tambo's reign, and a judge issued a warrant for his arrest for crimes he was committing in South Africa. and he immediately, his flight, I think, turned. They didn't land. I think they landed, but he went back immediately because they were informed that a judge in South Africa had signed a warrant for his arrest to answer for crimes against humanity. So there's a universal jurisdiction which any court or anybody can execute over you once they find out that you were involved in any crime against humanity or you're a perpetrator of a war crime in a time of war. Any court anywhere can decide to seize jurisdiction over you because of your presence in their jurisdiction. But there's also, like you said, UN and other international organizations. Right now, we have Human Rights Watch, we have Amnesty International that are closely following and monitoring activities on the ground. They're gathering information, right? And they are building cases against these people. The saddest thing is now that they're using the internet and they have videos, they're making voice recordings and everything, they're able to place you at a certain location, match your face to a voice, and then the actions that took place later. So there's a lot of evidence gathering going on right now, which will be easy to use. It's not as hard as it was in the 90s in Rwanda. Now they are even doing it over the internet, and the internet saves up these files for them. We have the United States that can decide to take over jurisdiction. We have the UN that can create a court, a specialized court, just for the war crimes that were committed in Cameroon during this time. So ICC is not the only avenue where war crimes and crimes against humanity can be prosecuted. There are many other avenues. We've had specialized criminal courts in different countries just because of the level of atrocities that were committed there during the times of war.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. You said something which I would like you to highlight a little bit more, because the idea of this topic today is mostly to educate our people, not so much concerning ourselves with La République, because we want them to answer for the abuses against our people, but to educate our people and not lead them down this path. You said something about the videos and audios and activities by instigators, agents provocateurs, for lack of a better term, from the diaspora. What amount of responsibility do those who say things like, when people in the diaspora go home, kidnap them, collect 2 million from them, chop their hands, take responsibility for these abuses against a civilian? To what extent can they be a part of any prosecution or incriminated in these human rights abuses or war crime, whatever category they fall under?
So to be very clear, people in the diaspora can be convicted of war crimes. If you're found to have not only committed, you have aided and abetted in the commission of war crimes. People always think that the person who takes his hand to commit the crime is the only perpetrator. No. If you facilitate, you aid, you abet, you incite, you're equally responsible. And I'm sorry, I had to catch a sneeze. And international criminal law recognizes, like I said, the principle of universal jurisdiction, which allows states to prosecute individuals of certain international crimes, including war crimes, regardless of where the crime was committed or the nationality of the perpetrator or the victim. So under universal jurisdiction, a state can investigate, prosecute, or punish individuals for crimes of war, even if the individual is not present in the country where the crime was committed. That is how diasporans get involved. So people who are in the diaspora who are suspected of war crimes may be subject to prosecution in other countries where they reside, or they may face extradition to the country where the crimes were committed. I don't know how I can say that, emphasize that enough, but there's nobody who is above the law, not because of your geographical location, not because you were not the person who physically raised your hand to commit this crime. you are as guilty as the person you sent to the slaughter, as guilty. And the state where you reside. So let me also emphasize that even the local courts can take jurisdiction, can have jurisdiction over you. There's a procedure for extradition where the country can say, we need you to deport this person for this and this reason, and you will be deported and tried. Likewise, the country where you reside can decide to take upon itself to investigate and prosecute you for the crimes that you are aiding and abetting to be committed in a different country against other people. Yes, so it's even easier, like I said, with the mounting evidence that we have on social media. It's not as complicated as if you go through most of the texts and most of the cases that we have had for war crimes against people, especially in Liberia, in Rwanda, in Guatemala, in all these other countries that have had civil wars. It was hard to build up evidence because we did not have the internet, we didn't have the resources that we have today. But today it is, you see how even when we had the Gambu massacre and the government was trying to deny, they're able to match footage, satellite footage and voices and say, yes, this actually exists here, this is what happened here, this is Cameroon. They're able to use technology now to place people and to trace people and a connection. Okay, so it's a lot easier to gather evidence today than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. So yes, diasporans are not excluded from all of this. We've lost you, Mr. Atto, we cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry. Now, talking about what you said, this age of technology, there is always some lame argument going around where some people will say, oh, we didn't do it. It was war propaganda. We were just claiming or boasting, and it wasn't us. It wasn't us. I don't know if that is an argument that would fly in the face of any implications or responsibilities or participating in either these war crimes or abuses against humanity.
That is untenable. It will not even stand. That is a lame argument. How can you say it is war propaganda? What was the whole point? And what did the propaganda lead to? You know, terrorism is not just the act of bombing places or making, just the fact that you make people live in constant fear for day-to-day life. That is terrorism right there. People living in fear. So if your propaganda for war is causing people to live in panic and fear, and then, like in our case, you make a propaganda for war and there are people on the ground who are foot soldiers who actually are implementing your alleged propaganda. It's not propaganda, it's a chain of command. There's a chain of command right there. Somebody's giving instructions from above and somebody's executing it below. And you're all equally responsible. In fact, the higher you are up the chain of command, the higher your responsibility is. So if you were making superfluous statements on social media and nobody was executing them on the ground, it would be different. But when you say, oh, go and burn this school, people are going to school, and then somebody literally goes and burns down the school. No. Those were instructions you were giving. Those were instructions. So let people be very clear about what they are saying, and they should learn to take responsibility for their words that produce actions on the ground.
Sorry, while you were speaking, I was trying to pull up and share with our audience. I don't have time now to find it, but maybe during this discussion or in further discussions. I don't know if you're familiar with US, I think Title 23 or 22, I think it's 23. There is a subsection that talks about international terrorism and domestic terrorism and the reach of the Justice Department of people on US soil who are involved in international terrorism. I'm bringing up the case of the US because you are in the US, and I think it would also apply in other democratic countries. I don't know if you are familiar with the subsection of that title, where it's very clear that people who are on US soil involved or commandeering terrorist acts abroad can be brought to justice in the US. Because I know that we have had our people in the US who have blatantly put out videos calling for, assassination of people back home for whatever political reasons, calling for kidnapping for ransom, actually collecting the ransom, calling for just abuses. We see, for example, what happened in Tico with the CDC workers and people in the diaspora coming out and claiming responsibility. So I don't know if you're familiar with this specific section of US law that gives the Justice Department the right to go after these people. And I don't know if you can speak to the use of the Interpol when it comes to spreading their dragnet to bring in people who are even residing in different countries. As we saw, they've done in Mexico, they've done in South America. They've been able to use Interpol to bring into the US people who are involved in crimes that the US has jurisdiction over.
Okay, I will not boast of profound knowledge in US laws on international terrorism, but let me say that that would definitely still fall under their right to exercise universal jurisdiction. So whatever their laws are, it's still within the same framework I was talking about, universal jurisdiction of courts when it comes to crimes of war and crimes against humanity. Any court anywhere can decide to take upon itself to try these cases. That's what I mean by universal jurisdiction. And the US has gone further to elaborate its laws and procedures in such a way that it can prosecute people for such crimes. And when you commit a crime, any crime, there are many courts that have jurisdiction. The court where you reside has jurisdiction. The court where the crime is committed has jurisdiction. And the place where you were arrested, the court there has jurisdiction. Those are basic principles in criminal law. So if you are living on US soil and you commit a crime, or you aid and abet the commission of a crime in another country on foreign soil, the US courts have jurisdiction. That is, let's just stick to basics, and let's not even bring in the terrorism law or anything, because it's just the crime. But the fact that you're on US soil and you breach US law on terrorism by committing it on foreign soil, US has jurisdiction. And because it's a war crime, it's a crime against humanity, US has the right to a universal jurisdiction. It may not have a right over you, maybe because of your citizenship or because of the place where the crime was committed, but because you're here, it has a right over you. Number two, because of the nature of the offense, that it's a crime against humanity or a war crime, they would still exercise that jurisdiction over you. That means that they will be able to go and gather the evidence that they need to prosecute you here. And that is how they use Interpol. Or they can decide to collaborate with the government of Cameroon using Interpol to extradite you from here to Cameroon. If there are guarantees that it's going to be a fair trial, if there's no guarantees, they will not repatriate you, they will not extradite you, sorry, they will try you here. And we've had many cases. I think there was a case in Nigeria where they brought witnesses. There was a Shell case in Nigeria where they also use this universal jurisdiction. They brought witnesses from Nigeria for the trial here. So the United States is one of those countries that is very particular when it comes to terrorism, and you staying in their country and funding, financing, and influencing acts of terrorism in another country gives them even more jurisdiction over you here in the US.
Thank you, Barrister. We know you have a limited time, and I think in about 3 minutes we would bring in Dr. Agbo, who also has about 15 minutes. I just wanted to share with you maybe we will talk about this after, which I put on the screen. It is actually Title 18 of USC 113B is the subsection on terrorism under US law. And if you go down, they have the definition of terrorism. And I think further down is where they have where the jurisdiction of those within the US, acts of terrorism transcending national boundaries. Yes, this is the section I was talking about, 2332B, where people in the US who commit acts of terrorism transcending the national boundaries. That is, even if you're in the US and you're committing acts of terrorism beyond the US boundaries, the US can still go after you. But this is something we can talk about later, and I can send you if you want to research it, because I think those of our people in the US who are engaging in very reckless statements, videos, acts, need to be very, very careful. And again, I would say that this would definitely apply in other countries that have respect for the law and
of course,
these acts against terrorism.
Of course. So I'll just like to emphasize here on something, Mr. Moderator. So there's something which people misunderstand. You may think that you're here just making videos and putting them out on the internet, but when you're making out these videos, you're giving out instructions and telling people, do this, do this, do that. And then these things are actually being committed. Your instructions are actually being executed. That is a chain of command. It's quite different that we're making videos like we are just now and talking and babbling, and I'm not telling anybody, if you see this, do that. But what is happening here is that you have people here who give direct instructions. You have people here who claim that they are generals, they have all kinds of positions in the army, and they have foot soldiers on the ground. It is different to sit here and we have a conversation like we're having right now, and even if it's a violation of any law, nobody's executing it over there. But if I sit here in my house and I say, my boys at so and so place, if you see so and so person, kidnap them or kill them or go after these people or anybody who is going to school, we don't want school, and there's somebody who is actually down there executing it, that is a chain of command. You are giving instructions. You're not just making a video for nothing or putting all these sentences, these words out in the open for nothing, because people are actually taking them and executing them based on what you said. And some of them are bold enough to take responsibility to say that I said this, my group did this, we are claiming ownership of this. What more do you need? Do you even need to have a case? They're implicating themselves. I don't know how to put it out, but those are clear cases where we have people taking responsibility for criminal acts which were executed elsewhere based on their instructions. So that is chain of command, that is them taking leadership and ownership. But what I would like to say in further to even end this is that the consequences of war crimes are very far-reaching for both the survivors of the war crime and the society at large. And we cannot just think that because it's not affecting us, it's affecting our neighbors, it's affecting people who are close to us in our society. And it creates a deep-seated distrust and division between us. And I would like people to be aware of that. The impacts are far-reaching. Besides the trauma on the survivors of the war crimes and their families, it creates division, it creates displacements, and the economic impacts and limitations on development are far-reaching. We're punishing ourselves with all of these atrocities. Thank you.
You left on something that tied into what Dr. Atiancho just touched on. These war crimes and the human rights abuses and the effect it's having on our society. And I was going to ask you before we left how this could turn the people against this struggle if these little things are not taken care of. I don't know if you can speak to the adverse effect on our struggle in general of these behaviors.
Of course. So, like I said, and thank God for the beautiful intervention from Dr. Fidelis that has enlightened us further on what PTSD and other psychological issues that could come out of war. It is good for us to know that these things have far-reaching effect. When someone is kidnapped, even if it's just for an hour, it's traumatic. It makes the person become sometimes dysfunctional, and they become a misfit in society because they're so conscious and paranoid about their surroundings. They're suspicious of everybody. And when we have this happening with many, many, many people, it has a multiplier effect. Not only is that person suffering, their family would start to suffer and their children would suffer for one simple act. I'm not call it simple, one traumatic event, because it's not simple. One thing that you think was just nothing to naked a grown man and take a video of him humiliating him and stripping him of his dignity would have an effect on that man, his ego, his relationship with his wife, that will filter down to their children, and the children will carry this to their own homes. So you see that it is very far-reaching and would cross many generations if we don't start taking proactive solutions like Dr. Fidelis was proposing in his intervention. These families would have they'll bear the brunt for too long. And soon our society will be a product of all of this trauma. So to just look at the short term, what happens immediately, like we said, is the breach of trust, is a lack of trust, the division. Look at just amongst, since this crisis started in 2016, we had the consortium. How many groups have splintered out of the consortium? Every day we have a new group with a new idea and everything coming out of it. We have many soldiers on the ground or many fighters on the ground with different leaders asking for different things, different strategies. And then the society, the civilians who are the ones bearing the brunt, how involved are they in this as they were before? Where has the passion gone? Where has the drive gone? People now are being bullied to continue to belong, to continue to fight. Whereas before, it was a struggle that was born out of people's passion, people's desire to be free. Now they seem to be more in a bondage because they are the ones who are at the end of the gun. Our people are the ones suffering. So you find that between the groups themselves, now there's a lot of distrust and division. Between the people and the leaders, there's a lot of distrust and division. And again, most of us are going on tribal lines and on county lines. And now we're breeding distrust and division even between ourselves along these county lines. Because some counties now are being led by different leaders, and the members or followers of this leader don't trust the other person who is leading the other county. It's making it even worse for us to coordinate efforts. It's making it worse for us to trust each other, and it's furthering the gap between us instead of uniting us towards a common enemy or towards a common purpose. These crimes are not helping anybody. The economy is not blooming as it used to be. We have forced our people to move out of our regions, move out of our areas, back into the enemy's camp, back into the areas where we're trying to be free from. We're trying to leave La République, but most of our people are going back into La République for safety. How does that even make sense? We're trying to free them from the grip of La République, but they are going back there for education. That's a countermeasure. Just because they're trying to avoid these war crimes, trying to avoid the human rights abuses that have been meted on them, not just by the armed forces, but also by their own brothers and sisters, especially by their own brothers and sisters. The struggle has turned into a means to settle scores between people. This group is getting bribe from that person to, it's It's just furthering the division. It's limiting our development, our growth. It has far-reaching economic impacts. When you're attacking individuals and their shops and their marketplaces, and what do we expect? People have to leave. Nobody's giving them an alternative. Nobody is saying that don't go to your store and don't sell, or nobody's calling on these boycotts and all of these things, and then giving an alternative. When you don't sell for 1 week, we'll give you a bag of rice for you to feed your family. How do people live? In terror.
Barrister Joyce, let me ask you, because this town hall has been involved in calling out the kidnap of some of your colleagues and the threats to some of your colleagues who were running for the bar position, Barrister Paddy, Barrister Compson, all who were kidnapped, tortured, Barrister Asu. We saw pictures of him in a wheelchair in a hospital. How have these abuses affected your colleagues, their practice and their free movement and their willingness to engage in defending our people? If we could narrow it down to your bar association.
Of course, at one time it seemed like lawyers have become their only target for separatist groups. They were targeted, they were kidnapped and for ransom. They were even those who were actively involved in cases that concerned other people who have been wrongfully detained in regards for the crisis. It demoralizes everyone in the society. People, like, why would you want to keep giving and getting nothing in return? And then they take away your freedom, your health, your dignity at the same time. You're putting your practice on the line, you're investing time and money for most of this work, which was done free of charge, or minimal costs were covered. And then on top of that, you're kidnapped, you're tortured, you're stripped of every bit of dignity that you may have left. That's why you find many people now just withdrawing. Many people have even relocated to other safer towns just because they do not want to be part of what is going on. They don't want their families to get involved. Your family is afraid for your life. You don't want to be a lawyer, and there are people who don't go to certain parts of Bamenda anymore. People don't go to Tarinkon. The people who are developing in Bamenda, most of them have started building in Mankon, have moved up to Mendankwe, where there's more peace and calm. Abandoned every investment down there, moving to where there's peace and calm and there's security. Why is that? Everybody just wants to stay alive. And people don't want the trauma of, going out and getting kidnapped. I had a friend who went to pick up her husband from the park. These are two lawyers. They kidnapped her, took away her car for a week. She went to one of the travel agencies to pick up her husband, who went to one of the cases in Yaoundé. Nobody cared about that. Nobody cared. Nobody asked questions. So would you think that she would again one day wake up or permit her husband, like, go and present somebody in Yaoundé for nothing, show patriotism, when the same people that you're fighting for are the ones who are targeting you and betraying you over and over? It doesn't work like that. And as we're making people who could have, like, now we're asking technocrats and we're asking professionals and experts to come in. Yes, they will want to come in, but who wants to come in and then become a target when you disagree with them? You tend to social media to insult them and identify all their family members and ask people to go for them because they have a contrary opinion. No.
I don't know if it's that. That's why sometimes one scratches their head and wonder if these guys are just working to destroy the struggle, and yes, the biggest beneficiary is La République. And so whether they are consciously or unconsciously doing it for La République, we know that from their actions, the biggest beneficiary is La République and their pockets, because we now know what we have been saying for a long time, which people have been disputing. We now saw it in the US indictment, the use of cryptocurrency And we have been saying that these guys who engineer these things from the diaspora have their guys wire money to them via cryptocurrency. And so they are in this now to enrich themselves, even at the expense of handing us back to La République by their activities. That is
very safe to say.
We have
that is very safe to say.
Yeah, we have Dr. Niba and Ma Nasta. So if we can just quickly go down, Dr. Fontem, unmute yourself.
Dr. Fontem, I'll cut you because I want to go.
Okay.
Barrister, thank you so much. I get to another meeting. I'll get to run enter the. I think Atoron just talk with you. I mean, think yes. I need to dispute the fact. Say, looking at the situation and say war crime be committed from both sides. But I also just want to emphasize, say, most of it, as best as I know, is from this engineered work. It's engineered from the people who want to benefit from it, and that we should not also underestimate the effect of Atanganji boys. Not that I am disputing that it cannot happen the other way around. We should not underestimate the effect of Atanganji boys, which means that what we really need in that part of our world now is that peace should come, humanitarian, whatever, there should be something happening, or the talks or whatever, because whether we are the ones responsible now or Cameroon government or the Atanganji boys, the reality is that our people are suffering. So this is what we should really use as some base to say we must bring peace back to that part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I just want to follow up with what you said. It is true that there are many actors, but if you remember at one time when the Atanganji boys were just newly introduced, people used to say, be the ones to even draw the differences. They'll say this was not our boys, this was Atanganji boys. But our own boys have started doing even worse than Atanganji boys. So much so that now there's even no way to draw a line or to differentiate them. We want our people to be different, to do the right thing, so that when something wrong goes on, we know that definitely it was these people who did it. Our people cannot do that. Right now, the lines are so blurred, we don't know who is who. The Cameroon forces are not any different from our own people doing the same thing, and everybody is focused on terrorizing the civilian population, which is wrong. So yes, we acknowledge that there are many actors involved here, but we want our people to be able to come out of this blameless.
Thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Fontem. Dr. Fontem, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'm sorry I may not be able to put on my camera because of my position where I am. I would like to say that I have listened intently to the discussion so far, and the issue of PTSD and the role of La République has really been a very exciting perspective from which to look at our wars. But I think that looking at our own role in this PTSD too is very, very critical if we must have a balanced picture of what is going on, because our role as Southern Cameroonians in this town hall is not only to criticize La République, but it is also to mend our ways so that we can be more disciplined, more focused, and more constructive in our approach to deliberation of our people. I think that if we are just, cheap buccaneers, just shouting, all over the place, we want freedom, and at the end of the day, everybody who is on the freedom ship has dived off the ship. It will be pointless. In fact, it will really be pointless. And this issue of PTSD has created a very interesting window through which to look at the picture, or through which to look at the problem. I think Barrister Joyce and Barrister Joyce has kind of picked on some of the issues that I wanted to touch on. But let me, however, look at the kind of solutions that we can bring collectively as a people. Because if Atang and Jibois, as Ma and Astad just pointed out, have free reign on our territory, it is certainly because we are operating in disparate ways. I'm doing my thing, Joyce is doing her thing, Ato is doing her own thing, his own thing. And at the end of the day, Atang and Jibois, knowing that we don't talk to each other, we don't coordinate together, can also find their own place and be doing it. And everybody knows that it is either Ato and Asta or Joyce who are doing it. And that's how Atang and Jibois have found a place within our disunity to also help wreck our reputation as a people. So if you look at in the last few months, we've been talking to a number of people and trying to find out why some people even gave up groups as administrators of groups because they were traumatized by the things they saw in those groups. How people would even come and publish lists of donors, people who donate to help the struggle. Why do you do that? If it is not just to shatter the mind of an individual. And other people who have stood by and watched how credible people have been shredded could not muster the strength to stay in the struggle. And so many people are running away from the struggle, not because it is not a genuine cause, but because of the manner in which it has brought shame and pain to so many people. So in looking at this, one of the ways by which we can put an end to this eternal creation of trauma is for our people to come together and coordinate their things. When this struggle started with the consortium, we did not have trauma. People did not have to run away from their homes. They did not have to run away from the town because it was so, even the black legs were so, people who, the black legs were even afraid to speak anywhere in town because they could not dare the wrath of the people. But today, the black legs are courageous enough to speak. And the people who have a cause for freedom are afraid to speak. Because over time, evil and wickedness have found a place on the stage. So the truth, when you have in a liberation struggle where reasonable people, people who are constructive, people who try to give an opinion are called idiots in public on social media, you can already begin to tell yourself that the struggle itself has become a vast trauma. So it is time for us to de-traumatize our struggle. It is an appeal that sane minds, Southern Cameroonians who have level-headedness, those who have a value for their upbringing and who have a value for what we are all aspiring to, should do this thing in a way that will shame the devil. I yield.
Thank you, Dr. Fontaine. And I hope our people take this with them. I also want to thank Barrister Joyce Nyamboli for, again, answering the call of coming to educate our people and on this very, very important subject. Again, we are going to segment this town hall and share it and rebroadcast out there so that people can focus on these different segments. We think that these war crimes and crimes against humanity, independent of war crimes, are things that would come after those who are committing them. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of these people, especially those in the diaspora, are young men and young women who still have many years ahead of them and this thing could catch up with them in a very long time. People like Bia, who is 90 plus, and Mbargangele, who is approaching 91, they are on their way out. So they are doing a lot of things and hoping. But our young people who are committing these crimes, kidnapping for ransom, beating people, seizing them out of cars, forcing them to pay so-called liberation taxes, not accounted for, collecting money through cryptocurrencies and all of that stuff, should be careful. So we thank you, Barrister Joyce, for taking the time to come and educate our people.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure, as always, to be on the town hall.
Thank you. And your last word and your last word of advice to our people before you leave us.
So what I would like to say, like I always do, is that we should be considerate in everything that we do to each other. There are some things which, like you said, have far-reaching effects and consequences. We should try as much as possible to make our struggle short-lived and to not cause suffering to our people. It's not necessary. There are many ways that we can prosecute our struggle without making our people to suffer. Thank you very much for having me.